Well, hello there, everybody. So it is August 20th. It just turned over to August 20th. It's just after midnight. I'm doing a quick update before I head off to bed. I'm meeting a new friend for tea tomorrow before I go to work, so have to make this reasonably quick. But finished Earth Abides. I don't want to take up too much time talking about it because I already talked about it a bit in the last video, but what a powerful ending. Really just an amazing piece of work that makes you question a lot of our assumptions about ourselves and the future, and I don't know, the whether or not civilization is a temporary lark. I mean, when you think about it, humans have not been doing this civilization thing for very long, only a few thousand years. In the process of our evolution, it might be an experiment. We always assume that the world is going to be like we envision it, and that the stuff that we know now is going to carry on into the future, and then we're going to build on that, and we're always going to progress, and we're never going to regress. And history proves us wrong in this department. There were all kinds of things that went on, all kinds of technological developments and social developments in the Roman Empire that ceased to exist when the Dark Ages happened. And we all go, oh, that could never happen to us. I mean, did you know that there actually was a women's liberation movement in Rome just before it all went to hell? No, you didn't know that, did you? You didn't. So, yeah. One thing that I talked about in my review of Earth Abides, which you will be able to find the link for in the video description, is... Okay, well, when I was 10, I read The Stand for the first time, Stephen King's well-known novel, and I was flabbergasted. I was so taken with it that it has resulted in a lifelong interest in apocalyptic fiction, which is kind of why I did the Apocalypse Now challenge this year. What's really interesting about this is that reading this book, I realized that probably most of The Stand, before it got into the supernatural war that was going on, was Stephen King taking things that had happened in this book, scenes that had happened in this book, and then developing them. For instance, there was a scene where Ish, the protagonist of Earth Abides, he's wandering around the remains of the United States, kind of trying to figure out what's happening, maybe looking for other people that, don't freak him out. And he contemplates going into New York via the tunnels. And he considers, because everybody has died of a horrible plague, he kind of, visualizes all the death and destruction that he's going to find in those tunnels, and he decides not to take that route. And it clicked in my head that that whole scene of Larry Underwood trying to get out of New York through the tunnels probably resulted from Stephen King reading this book, reading that scene and going, well, what if he had gone in? I could hear his process. I think that's great. Now, Stephen King has completely acknowledged his debt to this book in the writing of The Stand. He clearly has stated in several interviews that this was a large part of his inspiration, and it's not, it's not stealing Stewart's ideas. It's kind of like taking that as a starting point and going from there in many ways, although his dissertation, as it were, completely differs from Stewart's. They go in two entirely different directions in the ultimate ending of things. The thing is that Stephen King often gets credit for being a real innovator, And because his stuff has become mainstream fiction, we tend to not realize that he is building on an existing tradition. He's not inventing stuff whole hog, right? So yeah, it was very, very cool. In a way, I feel like I've come full circle. My interest in apocalyptic fiction started with The Stand, and this might very well be the best apocalyptic novel I've ever read, especially with all the deep, unanswered questions at the end of it. So, really recommend this book. Totally see why it was on the Sci-Fi Masterworks list. Get it. Read it. Now, moving on. I did indeed finally start and finish my Patrick O'Brian book, The Mauritius Command. I have looked up now how to pronounce it. Okay, so I'm already a fan of Patrick O'Brian. It's a particular type of taste. You have to really like action-oriented, very masculine perspective historical adventure, but I do. So I think this is just awesome stuff that's very well researched. Patrick O'Brian gets a lot of credit, which he rightfully deserves, for being perhaps one of the most historically accurate nautical writers out there, and he really kind of puts you on the ship's deck. So I was already primed to enjoy this, and already my perception is a little biased because I have discovered Aubrey, Captain Jack Aubrey, Lucky Jack, and his companion and best friend, Dr. Stephen Maturin, naturalist, in the first 3 novels in the series, and I've actually read more of the series. I found it was interesting. I was reading bits of it and I thought, this is familiar. Have I read this before? When I was visiting a friend in Vancouver, Surrey, actually, not Vancouver, who introduced me to the novels, I was using it for, bathroom reading, or, I'm sitting and waiting, reading kind of idea, sort of skimming through his book. The beginning was familiar. 1 or 2 pieces in the middle were kind of familiar. The end was a total surprise. So, okay, and it turned out to be everything that I hoped it would. This, in particular, is fascinating because O'Brian took a very real event, which was the Mauritius campaign, which was a significant campaign during the Napoleonic Wars, and fictionalized it within the context of his characters. So it's not entirely historically accurate, but he borrowed a great deal from history to make it very real. Okay, so I love it, and I think everybody should love it, but I am told that Patrick O'Brian is something that apparently only older men in North America read, which is a terrible shame, and I really hope that I can do my small part here to help people rediscover it. You can plainly see that some of the giants of space opera, like David Weber, borrows extensively from Patrick O'Brian and C.S. Forester. For just that reason, you really ought to read it if you're into space opera or military fiction or military science fiction. So, put it on your list. Outstanding. And again, you'll be able to find my review at Goodreads and at Worlds Without End. So then, for where I'm at for the challenges, Earth Abides was not possible to make part of my library reading challenge. It didn't qualify for any of the categories there. It does, however, bring me up to 11 out of 12 for the Science Fiction Masterworks, and it brings me up to 9 out of 12 for the Apocalypse Now challenges. The Mauritius Command did not qualify for any of the Worlds Without End reading challenges because it is not science fiction or fantasy. However, it did qualify for 2 of my bingo card slots here, namely historical fiction and takes place on a boat. Although technically, I'd like to point out that that was a badly phrased description for what you were going for, library guys, because in order for it to be taking place on a boat, it'd have to be like on a smaller boat that people are paddling, and they'd have to be, you know, you said takes place on the boat, so a voyageur maybe would be appropriate. That's a boat, but if it's got masts, it's a ship. It's not a boat. So just being a total techno nerd dweeb, nautical nerd dweeb, sorry, had to do it. So then, I guess we'll do the bingo dabber. There we are. Done. I've got 14 out of 24 now. So what's next? I've started The Secret History of the Mongol Queens, which qualifies for nonfiction and set in Asia. And I think I've got the rest of my reading list for the remainder of the challenge planned out now. As a First Nations protagonist, I have discovered People of the River by W. Michael Geer and Kathleen O'Neill Geer. I suppose because it's co-written by Kathleen O'Neill Geer, it could qualify for by a female author, but I'm going to exclude it for that because of the co-authorship. It's not entirely by a female author. It would have also qualified for historical fiction, of course, because it takes place in the history of North America before there were any colonists here. But I've already done something for that, so I am looking forward to that. For my graphic novel, I am going to read, what is this called? Bio Booster Armor Guyver by Yoshiki Takea. Is that right? Takea? Yeah, that sounds right. Why did I choose this one? The short answer is because I'm a Spelljammer nerd. Some people are laughing, others require an explanation. Okay, so Spelljammer is a Dungeons and Dragons setting designed for use with their fantasy role-playing game. And it basically is sailing ships in space. If you've ever seen Treasure Planet, then you kind of get an idea, right? It's all that, you know, high swashbuckling, Age of Sail kind of stuff, only it's happening in space. So it mixes elements of high seas adventure with space opera. It's pretty wicked. Now there's a creature called a Bionoid, excuse me, that is one of the creatures that you can encounter in Spelljammer. And it's generally agreed that, at least in its appearance and abilities, it was stolen whole hawk from the Guyvers. I'm just pointing that out because Wizards of the Coast, which now owns the copyright for Dungeons and Dragons, tends to be pretty anal about their copyrights, and you have no right to talk. None. Zero. So I got this because I wanted to see what the Guyvers were actually all about. I'd heard about them. I've seen pictures online. I've even used pictures of them to represent Bionoid characters. So I'm kind of eager to figure out what their take on it all was. So there we go. So for by an Okanagan author, I happened to have this. This is The Guardian by Jack White. Jack White is from Kelowna, and everybody informs me of this when they come into our bookstore to buy his work. Thank you, I know. And so I've never actually read anything he's written. This is a historical novel, again, with the historical fiction, which takes place during the time of Edward I and William Wallace and Robert the Bruce. So I'm intrigued to check it out and see if our local guy is any good at one of my favorite genres of fiction. I meant it when I said that I was going to read The Martian takes place, what was it? In a place I want to visit? Set in a place I want to visit. That's what it was. I would like to visit Mars. Now, I probably could have used Martian Time Slip, which I'm going to be reading for my new Science Fiction Masterworks challenge, as my book about Mars, if I was going to use Mars as the place. But because it takes place in an imagined future, I decided that that wasn't sufficient, because it might as well be a fantasy world if it's a far imagined future Mars. This is about as close to present day Mars as we could possibly get. I would really love to take a trip to Mars before I die. I'm 41. I have hope. So I'm going to read this one. I saw the movie. I really liked the movie. But I understand that the movie was based on the book. The book is always better. Almost always. So that's pretty exciting. I did some research by an Australian author, because I don't know what books are written by Australian authors. And I thought about reading something by Bill Bryson, who is a really popular travel and memoir writer, and also he does some history books, whose books are very popular at the bookstore where I work. But I prefer science fiction and fantasy, so I looked up winners of the Aurealis Award, which is an award for Australian science fiction, fantasy, or horror. And I discovered Jennifer Fallon, whom I have seen her books in our store, and there's quite a few of them. So I'm going to read Metalon. Metalon, I was right the first time, which is the first in a series of books she wrote called The Demon Child. And I'm choosing that one because it is high fantasy, so it counts for our high fantasy challenge. It is by a female author that I've never read before, so it's suited to the Women of Genre Fiction challenge. And it is an award-nominated book, so it's good for my 12 months, 12 awards challenge. So what the hell? Kill 4 birds with 1 stone. Lastly, and this one is going to qualify for 3. I'm really excited. I thought about it. It's going to qualify for 3 of the boxes in the bingo card, so that completes it. I am going to read Brown Girl in the Ring by Nalo Hopkinson. Now, I was given a book of short stories by Nalo Hopkinson when my husband was in the hospital a few years ago, and it was called Skin Folk, and I really loved it. But because I've only read 1 book by her, she also counts for the Women of Genre Fiction challenge. This book takes place in a post-apocalyptic dystopian Toronto. So it qualifies for my Apocalypse Now challenge, and it's an award winner as well. I don't remember what it was that she won. I will tell you when I review the book. And it takes place in Toronto, so it takes place in a place I visited. It is written by a female author who is Canadian. So that's my plan for the next few weeks. I will keep you updated as I go. Thanks for bearing with me. Follow me on my blog, follow me at Goodreads. Come join the Science Fiction Masterworks Book Club at Goodreads. It's a fun group. And until then, I'll see you next time. Bye.